Good evening. I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Boulder Valley School District Board of Education on Tuesday, November 18th. Sandy, will you please call the roll?
Albright.
Here.
Belville. Here. Benford. Here. Fuqua. Here. Marquis. Here. Myers.
Here.
Reed.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Oh my gosh, I don't have my mission and vision here. I can't believe I don't have this thing. I should have it memorized by now. I would like to remind all who are listening here this evening on TV and who have joined us here in the meeting, thank you for being here today. The mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. And that is what we are holding ourselves to as we have our board meetings and as we think about what we're doing here as school board members this evening. Let's see, the first item on our agenda is our superintendent's report. Dr. Messenger?
Give me just a minute. I'm trying to get my computer to work for me.
Well, we just had a long meeting with DAC and took us a minute, and we're a little bit late getting started here, so give you a minute to get your computer up.
Okay, so the first item I'd like to report on is around the CMAS, the Colorado Measurement of Academic Success, which we administered for students last week, seniors. This was the first time this assessment was administered in the state of Colorado. And so you might know, because there was quite a bit of news media around it, that we had a number of students who chose not to participate. Their families opted to not have them participate. And so our participation rate was right at 15% is my understanding. So we will continue to work through that process. I think that our students communicated to state education board members, legislators, and the Colorado Department of Education regarding some of their concerns around this state assessment. So again, I think that's been well reported and you're aware of that. So the other thing I would mention is that as that goes on, we are preparing for the spring state assessment, which includes the CMAS for all other students who participate in that, as well as the PARC assessment. This will begin on a March timeline and go through May. So Mark Schaefer and Assistant Superintendent for Leadership, Mark Schaefer and Sandy Ripplinger are taking lead on that, working with our assessment team, our tech team, so that we are ready for the assessment in the spring. It is significant because of the additional assessments, new assessment, and most of them will be conducted on an online technology environment. So lots of logistics to work through compared to the scope of preparation for the senior level assessment. This is far more significant just because of the number of students and the number of grade levels. So I just want you to know that work is going on. We have dedicated planning time around that. The primary themes that we're working on around planning for the spring assessment really regarding communications, both internal with our students and staff, and then also our parents, so that they know what to expect and what they can anticipate, and the scheduling of that. The other is the technology, availability, appropriate technology. Every device that's used for this online assessment needs to be checked and kind of pre-programmed to make sure that it is able to interface with the server to download the assessment. So there's just some details around that we know how to do. It just takes some time. And then the other is scheduling the assessments, because so if all the third graders are taking the assessment, they all have to finish the third grade reading assessment, section A, before any of them can take section B. So the sequence of the assessment within grade levels or sections matters with regard to the test administration. So it's just a fair amount of logistics. And then managing our tech resources around that. So communication, technology, and schedules are kind of our primary focus, and then gaining an understanding of the assessment itself, obviously. So a lot of work still going on around assessment, and we'll keep you posted with that. Any communique, obviously, that we prepare to send out to inform our community, internal and external, we'll copy the board on that so you have that information. So that's one big body of work we're on right now. The other is bond planning. Congratulations to BVSD for a successful bond election about 2 weeks ago. And so we had really anticipated success, and so we had started some planning in the fall, and we're continuing that work. You can anticipate on December 9th, which is, I think, our next regular board meeting, after the Thanksgiving holiday break. We will be visiting with you under the leadership of Assistant Superintendent for Operations Don Orr, some of our work around the Bond Oversight Committee, the phasing of the projects over the next 6 to 8 years. So we talked about there being multiple phases. We talked about that during the pre-bond election, and so we'll bring you more information about that. And also, we will be initiating a request for RFP, request for proposal, around education specifications and also our work around innovation. As you know, innovation was a major part of this bond, or a part of this bond. And also, we have not updated our education specifications for the schools for some time. So this will give us an opportunity to see, some contemporary work around that. So again, that's we've been preparing to put that out on the street, so to speak, so architects and design firms can respond to that. So good work going on. Again, lots of folks are working hard to get the stage set. We briefed the K-12 principals and assistant principals this morning on that timeline, and we'll be communicating directly with them. Part of it is so that they can answer questions within their community. Once we get the phasing finalized, so we know it's in phase 1, 2, and 3, and can make that more public, that'll answer some questions about the timing of the work. So more to come on that, but good planning already. Then the last thing I would mention is that under strategic planning, we just had some conversation about this in our meeting with the District Accountability Committee, Executive Committee. So we anticipate in early December that the executive summaries for each of the action design teams will be distributed to the board and made available to the public. So we're excited to get the, at least the near final stamp on those for review, knowing they could be revised going forward, but at least they'll be ready for public review. A lot of hard work by our chairs of the co-chairs of each of those committees and members of those committees. So we're really proud of their work. And we had a steering committee meeting for the strategic planning steering committee yesterday for a half a day, and did some good work together as we prepare for the Board of Education work session on Tuesday, December 16th. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we have been in conversation and are finalizing a contract with Education Northwest, which is the regional education laboratory in Portland, Oregon. They will be doing some work with us around some needs assessment around English language learners, and also some programming we do for our children in poverty. This is an area that they've done significant work in the field and research. So we've been in conversation with them for a couple of months. They've also put forward a proposal for consideration about continued work with us around the strategic plan. So we've not made a commitment on that to date, but some of our interest with them is helping identify the indicators or indices that we would look for. So once we are clear on where we're going with some of the strategies within the strategic plan, what will be the markers over time for your review and the community's review that we're making progress. Again, we think their work and their research could be very helpful to us as we go down that path. So more to come on that, but I've mentioned Education Northwest before. I just want you to know we are proceeding in that working relationship with them, and excited to be doing so. So we're looking forward to that. The other area that we will be continuing to work on are what are some targets, some areas that we'll be working towards within the area of talent, learning, and partnerships, which are those 3 domains in the strategic plan that we've briefed you on before. So as we do that work going forward, how do we mark our pace? How do we know we're making progress towards those things that we've identified in the strategic plan? Again, I think Education Northwest will be helpful to us on that. So those are the 3 big areas: the assessment, bond planning, and strategic planning. And it's been a busy last month, and we're looking forward to some busy times ahead. So I'd be glad to answer questions about those topics, President Albright and members of the board, or any other topic that's of interest to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
So Bruce, there was no sanction or penalty from the state for the low participation rate of our seniors in CMAS, was there?
Not as of today. What our understanding was, and what we will pursue in our conversations with the Colorado Department of Education, is if we make every effort a good faith effort to make the assessment available, administer it in a way that all students can participate, then we will have satisfied the expectation, and we believe we did that. So, so we've not heard from the Colorado Department of Education, but if we do, we'll work through that. So there is some active discussion going on at the state level around whether parents can opt their students, their children, out of the state assessment or not, or whether that's a refusal to assess, and what role does the parent play in that, or the student, I suppose, if they're 18 or older, and what role does the school district play in that. So I think given what happened last week across the state around the non-participation, there will be more conversation about that. So I think that some of what you've read about and heard about is this 95% participation expectation. And so that's within, my understanding is that that's within federal guidance from the U.S. Department of Education around No Child Left Behind. The assessments we administered last week were a state assessment, so really not under the jurisdiction or review of the relationship with the U.S. Department of Education on assessment. So that's probably going to be debated some. But legal review of that initially is that kind of two different things. Now, our legislature could pass legislation around a participation rate and make us accountable to that around accreditation, but we don't believe that's in place right now. So I think the low participation rate in some of the schools and school districts will generate more conversation, but yeah, nothing to date, Sam.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Is that it? Yep. Okay. Sure, Shelley.
So the conversation about opting out, what do you mean by that?
So I don't know if you heard any of the interviews last week from representatives from the Colorado Department of Education, but they stated, which I think is factually true, that there's nowhere in state legislation that gives permission for an opt-out provision, that it is an expectation according to statute that all students are required to take the assessment, is what the guidance by law gives. So, so the question is, can you really opt out, or is it a refusal, and what rights do parents have around that? So I think this is an issue that is being discussed presently with the House Bill 1202 task force on assessment, because probably there is some need for clarity around that, so it doesn't leave school districts and schools and parents and others in a not knowing what to do situation. I think that there will be interest in, giving some clearer guidance and language going forward around, opt out or refusal or choose not to participate, both what options are available and what are potential consequences if there's a low participation rate as a result of that, either for the student or the school district or the state, because part of our requirement under the state testing model that's in place right now is a commitment we've made to the U.S. Department of Education as a state of Colorado around a variance from No Child Left Behind. We're one of the states that has a variance from the provisions of No Child Left Behind. And in making that request, this has been reported in the media, when the variance was granted, there were certain things as a state we agreed to do. And this state testing model that's we're implementing is the model we've gotten the variance based upon. So
You mean park?
Park and also the CMAS. And so my understanding and what I read is that if under this 1202 task force, in their report to the legislature, if the legislature were to alter the testing regime or plan for the state, then I think they probably would have to submit a proposal to change the variance they have with the U.S. Department of Education. And I don't know what it would take to have that revised or reviewed, but that's kind of where we are. So that is also being talked about with this task force right now, and probably will be discussed in the legislature.
I'd like to just ask a clarifying question about the task force. So what is, and I think it's I want our public to understand this. So the task force is meeting, they're hearing public comment right now from across the state. They've held a number of meetings. They will be meeting again in December and January, and then, as I understand it, making a report to the legislature.
Correct.
So is it true that the legislature could change the law about this? So could this be then a place where parents could have input?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's a political process. And so an early part of the work that's going on now is this task force. So while they're still doing information gathering and discussion, I think they met yesterday. And so there's a link on their website, and we've distributed that to all the parents and staff here, just a way to provide input for their consideration. My understanding, they've received a lot of input, I hope some from Boulder Valley. And so that should inform their report to the legislature. And then going forward, there may well be legislation introduced or in this session, as soon as this session. So of course, as a district, as a community, we could be involved in efforts with our local delegation of legislators. I know we have a meeting with them on December 1st, our annual legislative meeting, and this might be a topic that we'll want to visit with them about in anticipation of what might come up in this session, probably not knowing on December 1st what that might be, but just letting them know our general level of interest, and then let them know that we'll be in contact with them once we know what unfolds with this final report and upcoming in the legislative session. So yeah, that's our timeline, Lori. And and it's not to say that whatever will happen in the 15th session, there could be other changes or considerations in future sessions. So it wouldn't all have to happen this session.
Sure, Tina.
Just a quick add-on again. Is the READ Act, if we change the READ Act, if the state decided to, would that also require a variance, or was that after the variance was granted?
Yeah, I think not. I think that is as a result of the READ Act that was approved by the legislature now, 2 years ago. And so this is our obligation as a district to administer a literacy assessment under the READ Act. And so I believe we satisfy the requirements of the U.S. Department of Education and our agreement with them through the reading assessment, which is in Park. So this is in addition to that, is my understanding. So that too could be changed over time.
Shelley.
So I'm a little confused about the opt-out question. I mean, obviously, kids and parents opted out all across the state.
Yes.
So was there opt-out language somewhere coming from the individual districts or from the state, or we actually stated that people could opt out. So.
Right. So that's been a practice in our district and probably many districts from time. We don't encourage it, but when parents inquire, we have in every school is not exactly the same, but we sort of have a procedure that we go through, and so they are informed about what the options are, and that we don't provide services instead of the test. So if they opt out of the test, then they're being kind of an excused permission to not be in school that day. So some of that's just a communication tool. And so really what the parent in that case is doing is opting their child out of attending school on the day the test is being administered. So obviously they missed the test, but they also have an excused absence of which the parent is informed of. So they're not just missing school without parent permission. So that's been a practice we've used, not nearly to the extent that occurred this year, obviously, but my understanding is that other districts do something similar. So I think it's just probably a little bit of semantics, but also, technically I think there is not a provision in the law, that's correct, that says you can opt out. I think it's just been a protocol we have followed.
So clearly, since it's not a provision in the law and people did it anyway.
Right.
What would be a different requirement at this point that would cause people to test?
Yeah, I don't know unless something changes, Shelley, that anything much would affect that probably.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, obviously, we can't force students, and we wouldn't force students to take
Right.
a test. We can encourage it, we provide opportunity, all of those things I mentioned. But at the end of the day, if a young adult or a parent of a child said that's not something we want to do, then we need to have a way to recognize that. And also make sure that the student's accounted for. We don't want them just not being in school, but not being at home either, so.
So can you remind me what the juniors are doing in the spring?
So they're all doing the ACT, and I don't know I don't know that off the top of my head exactly what the
I can't
other
remember.
testing requirements are. But there are some, but I don't, we sent that earlier, we could resend that, but, so there's different requirements at each grade level. I'd have to look that up, Shelley.
Okay.
But there are some other requirements besides the ACT for juniors.
Right, I was just wondering if that's going to be the next.
So there's the level that is most impacted by the increased number of assessments is the high school level. When you look at all the different grade levels and different subtests, it's over 30 additional assessments from 9th grade through 12th grade. So it is the level that's most impacted and probably the one that goes most beyond the federal requirements for assessment. That's been much talked about.
And just one other question, where are we on assessing what the cost to the district get this on?
So, under the leadership of Leslie Stafford, we've created, and I think I've shared that with you, or we will, just the spreadsheet where we're collecting data. So we're going to review that in cabinet tomorrow, and we'll get the information as best we have it to you prior to the December 1st legislative meeting. There's some of the fields that we'll continue to fill in, so we won't wait until we're all done with that before we share it, but we want to get it as up to date as we can so that you have that in. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but if there's additional explanation needed, we'll provide that. But we are in process of collecting that data. Leslie, do you want to add anything to that?
I do know what other tests they take in 11th grade. I've learned a lot about assessments.
Thank you.
They definitely take the language arts test, and that's the March through April exam, so I know that's another test they take. I think we'll have some pretty good information based on this fall, but we'll have even better information. We're going to work on some surveys to do for the spring, so that then we'll have a follow-up in the spring with even more information.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I had a question about, just following up still on this assessment question. I think earlier you mentioned that we have limited availability of devices that are set up, that are cleaned and appropriate for a student to use in one of these tests. Is that information, and together with the scheduling challenges that we have looking forward in the fall, is that going to be included in this report that we have from the fall assessment issues, as well as what we anticipate will be the problems in the spring?
I would say we'll give some estimate of the needs to do the assessment. I think until we actually build the schedules, we won't, and we haven't yet. I mean, we've started anticipating that. We won't actually know, how big a window we'll have to use within the approved window and what the impact will be on the 75 devices available at that school. I mean, until we really build the schedule. I mean, what we can say is we know we have this many subtests and these are online, and every time a student takes them, they'll need a device. But if there's 25 devices and they do them back to back to back, then it only takes 25 devices. If we do them all at the same time, it takes 75 devices. So until we build the schedules, that's some of what Leslie was just saying, is that until we actually go through one administration, we'll have a sense, but we'll add detail and more description once we've done it. But certainly impactful, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it'd be great to have that before a meeting with the legislators.
And I
so
certainly
that-
think we can describe the general parameters and challenges with it. I think it just won't be tight data until we run and do it once.
Yeah, I was hearing from middle school teachers that were impacted by the seniors test. And I just think that's a really important story to tell, that it's not just the seniors that are being asked to
Right.
take, but that everyone's negatively impacted. And, we're shirking our duties and teaching our 6th and 8th grade kids when we give these tests as well.
So I will just say that once we saw the number of opt-outs we had on the weekend before the senior assessment, we reduced the impact on middle level and other schools because we didn't need to transport the laptops to those schools because the students weren't going to be there. So it would have been more impactful had more students taken it, but we adjusted that once we knew better where we were. I mean, we had to anticipate they all were initially, so we built plans for that and then adjusted it days before.
So you had the weekend off then, the weekend before we gave the tests, instead of setting up all these computers. And
A little
I think
break for staff, yes.
I thought you said, when we asked 2 weeks ago about this test, I think you said that you would have them back over the weekend.
Yes.
With all hands on deck to
We
be.
had trucks reserved. We were ready to go.
So,
we
okay,
adjusted
well,
our
good, you
plans.
had the weekend off then. Glad to hear that.
Can I ask one more on testing?
What?
Can I ask one more?
Of course, Tina, please.
So one of the things that I found was so troubling is that you canceled school for other grades during the test. Is that something we anticipate will happen in the spring as well? Or are we going to find workarounds? Or long-term, can the bond help us create the space we need? Because I thought that was, actually, personally, I thought that was the worst part of the whole issue.
Yeah, I think, so one of the challenges we have with the senior level assessment is not all the students are in common classes, so we can just have them take the test. They're, they're just spread all over, so we just don't have. So This is made somewhat easier with other levels. I don't want to say easy, but easier. So like the math assessment will be content specific, so in algebra or the course. So it'll still take the same amount of time, but we can embed it better within the day, so it should be less disruptive. And then we have a way to distribute it over time. So I don't want to imply it won't be impactful. It'll just be spread out more. So we do not today anticipate that we'll need to do any mass releases of students to accommodate the other assessments in the spring like we did this fall. And partly because the way the test will be administered, and we have students in more common classes. Now, the junior ACT assessment we have traditionally released on that day. So that isn't a result of anything new. That's just been our practice. And I don't have reason to believe we won't do that again this spring. So I just want to make that clarification. But the other assessments, we're working right now to try to figure out how we can do it embedded within the day and, just spread it out over time.
Okay. Any other comments on assessments? No, or anything else on the bond planning or on the strategic plan? Board members, any other comments? Good.
Yes, I have a quick comment.
Sure, Shelley.
When we're looking at assessments, I think I may have asked this, but I'm not sure. Are we also looking at the amount of effort that's being put in at the TS Gold and at those levels, preschool, kindergarten?
Go ahead, Leslie.
Yes, I have a lot of information on that, so I'll include that as well.
Okay.
The TS School, the readiness assessment you're asking about, Shelley. Yeah.
Yeah.
It too has gone through some, so they've been working to try to lessen the impact of that, meaning they being the state level planning committees, and so that's been a bit of a moving target for us, but I assume we use the best information we have in this report, knowing that it too may change over time.
Any other questions or comments on the superintendent's report? Okay, thank you then, Bruce.
You bet.
The next item on our agenda is the District Accountability Committee report. And we're starting our new practice here of, not starting because this is the second time we've done this, but we've asked District Accountability Committee people, and we refer to this as DAC, to give us an update on a regular basis. So, Lisa Medler, thank you for being here today and for your report. Thank you.
I'll keep this fast since we just had a brief meeting. But we figured we wanted to at least keep up with the routine and didn't want to break with it. So I'm just going to give you a quick report from our last meeting and kind of our future direction, okay? So we have a new crop of folks, so we're really trying hard to bring along new DAC members. So Laura Hale actually put together a short orientation for them. It was actually well attended, and several veterans came and attended well as well, feeling like they need a little bit more background information just on requirements and to have a little bit more discussion. We had a presentation from Jonathan Dings on what we've learned from assessments thus far, so kind of the trends of what assessment is telling us in preparation for the district UIP and reviewing that, so getting a little heads up on that. I will say that we have been investing time in DAC, just building up people's background knowledge in anticipation of a little bit more activity and recommendations coming from us to you, hopefully in the spring. So we're really trying to build up people's background knowledge right now. So that's what that was part of. We also gave a homework assignment. The other thing that we're trying to get into a routine on is having enough time for folks to go back to their SACs, the school accountability committees, have a little bit of discussion with them, and then bring back information to inform DAC so that then we can turn around and inform you as the board. So the homework assignment was to take the list of the strategic plan action teams, so just that list of 17 action teams, and get a sense from the SACs, what are they interested in and what would they want DAC to look at a little bit more once those action plans are available. Again, not moving or doing anything, just trying to build up a way of interacting with them, building a routine, and then getting a general sense of where interest lays. And then I'll say otherwise, we are continuing our conversations with you all and look forward to getting some assignments. I know that Laura Hale presented at your last board meeting. We just had a discussion with you, and so I think we're starting to narrow down what we want to look at further. And so it sounds to me, although it still needs to be finalized, formalized, that we would be looking at, continuing to provide feedback to you on the district UIP, on spending priorities, on the strategic plan and a role that DAC can play, especially around those ways of measuring progress. And so I think that's an area of strength and interest for the DAC. I think taking a deeper look and building up knowledge so that we can provide you with some recommendations on student data privacy. It sounds like that's an area where you guys are going to delve in and relook at your policy. And then lastly, it sounds like there's some interest in digging in a little bit deeper on the area of assessments and gathering input, especially from parents and students, on the impact that they are experiencing from assessments, whether it's state or classroom assessments. So again, not formalized, but that's definitely what we're hearing thus far. That's it, unless you guys have questions for me.
Thank you very much for your report. Thank you also for the meeting that we just had, the work session, to talk about what the issues are. DAC, as you know, is the board, the committee that advises the board. So thank you to you and all members of your committee for your service. It helps us do a better job. It's real important for us to know what's going on in the community, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
Board members, are there any questions or comments? I've got one or two, but let me just see if anybody else has a comment. Any board members, any comments, questions? Something you mentioned that I was just curious about. You said you have, I think, maybe a large group of new members. Do we have somebody from every school, and how many are new this year? Do you have a rough idea?
I'll give you ballpark.
Ballpark.
I'd say maybe about a third of our members are new. And I would say, no, we do not have all schools represented. So I think we're working with the district to reach out to the schools that are not represented to see if there are some folks that we can pull in. And as a result already of some of those efforts, I know that we've gotten some new members even just within the last month. So, but we're definitely not at 100% representation.
Well, that would be something we should be working on then, right? We're in agreement on that. I had one other, excuse me, one comment. And I think you mentioned that one thing you've worked on, and I think it makes just a whole lot of sense, is having background knowledge and information. Sometimes it's hard to have opinions about things that you don't know a whole lot about. And so that's one thing that's real important for us in the district, both in the board and for administration, is to make sure that information is getting out about what's going on. I mean, just similar to this conversation we just had about assessment and the cost and what's entailed with all that. So I'm glad that that's a part of what your leadership is thinking about, is making sure that there's good background knowledge, because it's a way to spread out, since you do represent so many schools. Not all. We should work on that again.
Yes,
But
we are,
thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate that goal about,
I
you
will
know.
take that back to folks and let them know that you're really supportive of that approach.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, just my opinion. Tina?
Yeah, do you still do the membership survey? There's a survey that DAC used to fill out that would talk about each member of their school, I think, describe their student. Is that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I would need to go back and check.
Okay.
Could have missed
I mean, if you
something
do,
in
that
there,
might be a
but
good,
yeah.
the results might be worthwhile sharing with the board.
Where's Ron?
Thanks for all
Leadership
your work.
changes and plans change. Oh, you didn't do it?
Yeah, it was like from somewhere else.
Oh,
It was in
okay.
the rule book.
Okay, good. All right, any other questions or comments for Lisa? Thank you very much, and please express our thanks to your committee members.
Sure, my
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you for
Sure.
being here. Okay, the next item on our agenda is public hearing and public participation, but we have no one here signed up to speak.
So the next item after that is board communication. So board members, Sam?
Well, our son is a senior at Boulder High, and he joined nearly all of his peers in opting out of that test, and it's not a decision we took lightly at all as parents or as a board member, but it seemed to us it was that particular assessment for that grade level at that time was inappropriate use of instructional time. So I'm glad our district has spoken out on it. And I appreciate the kids who wrote to us. Several hundred of them wrote to us to make their concerns known, and I hope it was a moment where they could take, on a broader note, a commitment to remaining engaged, as they move forward in their lives, wherever their paths take them. So hopefully a learning experience for everybody. And I just want to express my thanks to everybody who worked on the 3A campaign, the SIPC, your leadership, Dr. Messenger, Impact on Education, and everybody who coordinated that effort, and particularly our taxpayers who voted in favor of increasing their taxes to invest in our schools. A lot of them don't have kids in the schools anymore, or maybe never did, and that speaks to how they value the common good and connect their own self-interest to it. And I was particularly impressed by the margin of victory and the fact that, just thinking about how many of those people don't have that day-to-day connection to the schools that some others do, and really appreciate their support, and will spend your money wisely. And we encourage everybody to follow the bond oversight process and watch what happens at your schools. It's going to be great. So just wanted to say that and thank everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And anyone else? Shelley?
I would just like to say, for those of you that don't know, Tina and myself and Lori delivered donuts and hot chocolate to the protesters at Fairview during their event. And I, for one, was quite impressed. Inside the gym, first of all, they were protesting in sub-zero weather out there. And then inside the gym, they had a huge desk set up with multiple computers where kids could go in from the cold and write their letters to their legislators. And the email distribution was all set up to all of us, which is why we got 100 emails that day, because they were just going in, trailing into the gym and pushing the button. But it was just extremely well organized, and I thought they were confronting one of the great challenges of their time, which is in our mission statement. So I felt like they were right on it. So it was also interesting. I don't know if you saw in Diane Ravitch's blog that someone had said she had featured the protest in her blog. She's an educational writer. And because one of the Fairview students had written to her and told her about the protest, so she had featured it. And in the comments section, a person wrote in and said, wow, those kids need to look out. They're not going to be able to walk at graduation. They're going to, there's all these sanctions that are to come down on them for doing this. And I just felt so good reading it, knowing that that wasn't true. And that, that we were not going to be doing that to those kids. And so it was a good feeling. I also wanted to share that I went to visit a school in Denver last week called the Isabella Bird School. And it is the school where 3 former teachers from Boulder Valley School District have started this school now. It's now 2 years old. And they are the leadership team of the school. It's one of the innovation schools in Denver. And they gave me a tour, and one of the things that they were interested in showing me was that they had helped design the school. Those 3 teachers had worked with the architects to design the school and to design really innovative learning spaces and make sure there's natural light and all the things that they've come to know is important. And I just want to suggest that when we're building out our new schools, that we actually let teachers in on the design process, because they are saying that that's one of the reasons their school works so successfully, is because they understood what they were trying to do and they designed the school for it. So I hope that we will allow that kind of input from teachers. They also had some interesting things to, oh, by the way, they make all their meals from scratch in their kitchen. They bake fresh bread every day, and the parents come in and have breakfast with their kids at the school. When they have the universal breakfast, and they were talking about what a nice feeling that was in the school. So I did want to share a couple of things they said, and this is one of the reasons why I brought up the TS Gold. They had a teacher actually monitor how much time she was spending doing that kindergarten readiness assessment. And in the first 6 weeks of school, she spent 83 out of 204 hours of her time completing this TS Gold assessment. And so those teachers in that school are meeting with the superintendent of DPS schools to talk about how really out of control that assessment is and how little time they actually were able to spend instructing the kids at that age, or even being with them, because they were so busy observing. So I wanted to pass that on to our board, that's something that we need to be watching out for too, not just CMAS and seniors, but the effect this is having on our youngest kids in the district. They also talked a little bit about their preschool situation there. And one of the things they said that is concerning them about the way it's rolling out is that the kindergarten curriculum has been pushed down to preschool. And so the principal's feeling was that it was not a good idea to do that the kids were being asked to do too much in preschool. So I would ask us to look at that too in the district. I mean, I know we have a certain curriculum that we're using, and I mean, maybe you can inform us, Bruce, as to what level that curriculum is. It's not clear to me. Is it kindergarten being pushed down? She's saying that first grade's being pushed down to kindergarten's being pushed down to preschool, and that in fact it's not healthy for those kids. So if we are going to be taking care of these kids during the day, I think we ought to make sure we're doing no harm to those kids. So I'm not sure how we can bring that up. And do you have any suggestions, Bruce, for understanding how our curriculum's impacting preschoolers?
So, if I could, President Albright, members of the board, so this is a active topic of conversation, and it's one that we share concern around. So I would just tell you, under Kim Blumen, our Director of Early Childhood Education, this is an area that we are paying attention to, and Assistant Superintendent Sandy Ripplinger, we've had conversations this fall about the need for us to, take a good look at our both our preschool and our kindergarten curriculum and expectations to make sure they're developmentally appropriate. And we also have both half-day programs as well as full-day, and we've talked about advancing to full-day programs across the district. So that, again, is another opportunity to make sure that we're doing the kinds of activities. It is not our intent to bring first-grade learning activities into kindergarten. If we have full-day kindergarten or preschool, it's about readiness, to make sure that all students are ready for the age-appropriate curriculum. That's actually been some of our conversation within our strategic planning process as well. So as we work on all students being proficient, that doesn't necessarily mean advancing everybody a lot more. It means making sure all students are proficient, and those who are able to do more, we should accommodate that, but not just forcing a curriculum at an inappropriate level. So, I mean, I think, to answer your question, Shelley, about future conversation around it, it would be when we get an update on early childhood and continue that conversation. I just want you to know that's an area we are also interested in, and don't want to put, we want to make sure we have age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate learning activities and curriculum for young children as well as older children. So there is a temptation to do that. So that we can follow up with Kim and just see what analysis she's done on that.
Well, probably the most interesting takeaway I took from this visit was how much these teachers and how much this principal were willing to push back on Park and on TS Gold. And when I asked them how in the world they thought they were going to make progress on that, they said that someone has to do it. And so I would like this board to consider being another, group of people who has a willingness to push back on this, because, clearly 83 out of 204 hours assessing someone within a child within the first 6 weeks of teaching is not appropriate.
Again, this has been a topic, just the readiness assessment itself. We just a week ago, we had a conversation with our early childhood team. This would not be our recommended best practice, especially given the limited time we're with the young children. So, because it really consumes, as you've mentioned, Shelley, a lot of time. So we'll continue to work with our state on an appropriate readiness assessment, and one that's not so labor and time intensive. I mean, there is data we can collect through this process that we think has value, but there is always a balance to when you're spending more time assessing, and it takes teachers and others away from instructional time. So it's again, one of those that's on our radar. Obviously, the opposite end of the senior level, but equally as important to us. So, thanks.
Thank you. Good. Jenny? Jenny?
So Shelley, I'm going to start by responding to you just a little bit, because I happen to be at Emerald Elementary. You were there too, Lori. I saw you a lot the last couple of weeks, actually, because Emerald had a party to celebrate the fact that they're getting rid of the old school and getting a new school, and they were happy. So I went over. It's close to my house, so I went over. But one of the things I did while I was at Emerald was I had a chat with the preschool teacher who was there, because she was really proud about an activity she had done with her preschoolers that week, and wanted to show me some of the results of that. The preschoolers had obviously gone home. This was after school, but it was so age appropriate, and I was absolutely charmed. So they had and I was going to mention it as an example of partnerships with the community, actually, sort of meeting our goals, because they had gone over to a neighborhood home. I'm not exactly sure what the connection was with the school. I assume it was a friend or a family member of somebody who worked at the preschool. But they'd gone over they'd taken their little preschoolers over to a neighborhood home that had an apple tree. And this was like a banner year for apples. I don't want any more apples from anybody, I'm just telling you, But anyway, so it's been a banner year for apples. And so they actually even borrowed an apple picker from former board member Jean Paxton, and took this apple picker over to the house, and they all picked apples, and they all came back to school, and they did, various projects having to do with apples. And Kim said some of these kids had never seen an apple off of a tree before. They had no idea. So it was really the kind of activity that you might do with your own child to introduce them to the idea that fruit comes from trees. And they had pictures, and they ate the apples, and they talked about good nutrition. But it was all, the work product and the pictures, it was very age appropriate and very thrilling for the kids. And so just as a response to you, that's only anecdotal. It's one lesson in one preschool, but if that's an example of what we're doing in our preschools, then I think I can say with confidence that what we're doing is age appropriate in education and good developmentally for kids. And I think the kind of thing that you would do to prepare your children for kindergarten and on. So just to respond a little bit. So I did that, and then I wanted to mention that I attended the CASB Fall Conference. You were there too, Lori, and it was interesting. We had an opportunity to sort of visit with other board members and learn that many school boards around the state are facing the same kinds of issues that we're facing with limited resources. In fact, many are much worse off than we are. We were one of the few districts there that could say we passed a significant bond initiative. A number of the regional school districts are from Adams County and didn't. So we're really fortunate in that way. A number of the school districts are also working on strategic planning, which I thought was interesting. I didn't realize that it was kind of the flavor of the month. But so it'll be interesting to compare notes with board members as we go forward with that process. And then, but I will say that it's been at the dinner talk, there was a sort of a roundtable discussions about what was the number one issue facing districts, and there was unanimous agreement that after funding, the number one issue that districts were upset about, or board members were upset about, was the amount of state testing going on. So that was, and the moderators, the CASB staff told us that was the same around the state, that more than discussions about Colorado standards, which was not they thought they might get some conversation about. They didn't get conversation about that. What they got conversation about was the amount of testing going on. So we're not alone in our concerns about that as well. And then I'll also mention that I attended the Colorado School Finance Project with Bruce was there, and Lori again was there, and Kathy Gebhardt. Oh, and this was good news, but I don't know if people saw the information. Kathy Gebhardt was there reporting on the lawsuit that she filed on behalf of us and a number of other people throughout the state, and they got an initial ruling. The state had filed a motion to dismiss, and they got a ruling back. The court said the case could go forward, and the ruling came down in 2 weeks, which is extraordinary. So that was very fast and much faster than they expected. And so that's, step one in a long process, but good for us. I mean, the case is going forward and didn't get thrown out at the very beginning. So, and then, there was, the superintendents reported, and we all know that the superintendents have sent out their letter to the state legislature with suggestions going forward. And actually, I have to say, it's somewhat good news that, the governor's initial proposed budget has, besides growth and inflation funding for public education, has additional resource. I mean, he's just starting right off the bat with additional resources for public education, not as much as we would like, and so I'm hoping that we can pry some more out of the state legislature, and certainly no less than he's proposing, but that's an initial proposal. And as you're also all aware, we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic House of Representatives, but a Republican Senate, so it should be interesting, and nobody's quite sure how that will play out, but it'll make things interesting. The CASB lobbyist who was there, Jane Urschel, said that could be good for public education because that they'll just kill each other's bills, and they have to pass a finance bill and the rest, and they may not do much else with legislation around education because, so maybe no new mandates potentially, we'll see. And then, let's see, oh, and again, congratulations. I really couldn't have, I want to congratulate our school district and our voters on passing this bond, which I think we're going to do wonderful things for kids, but I really can't say it any better than you did, Sam, so that's all I'll say on that. And I think that's it. Oh, that's it.
Thank you. Board members? Anyone else? Well, I'll just say one more thing about the bond. I just thought it was just phenomenal, the vote. I was so relieved and pleased. I just think it's a real strong vote of confidence that the voters in this district have about our school district. I think it shows that they believe that we are headed in the right direction, that there's a high level of trust, and there's a high commitment to public education, and I just couldn't be happier to live here and be in this great community with our voters. I also know a little bit from the inside out that the campaign was extraordinary, and I would again like to thank Fran Ryan for her leadership. She's the CEO of Impact. She did a lot of the behind-the-scenes work on this campaign, and then together with our three co-chairs of the campaign, who were Suzanne Hoover and Frank Bruno and Chuck Sisk, and they just did a fabulous job together with other members of our staff, our leadership. Bruce, thank you. Deirdre, thank you for being out talking to people, and board members as we were out. It was real heartening. I just thought it was a terrific job. But the most fun thing I thought was last Thursday at 8:30 in the morning over at Fairview High School. I went to go support the students who were there opting out of these tests. It was pretty darn cold. It was about 0. You said it was a little below 0. I'm not sure. I thought, what?
Wind chill.
Well, yeah, well, if we count wind chill, I guess it was below 0. But the sun came out, and the students they were so articulate, they were so informed, and they were so willing to act. And that just was just truly inspiring to see the level of knowledge that they had about the cost of these tests and what it meant for their education, and their articulate statements about where they were in their lives in terms of going through applications to college and taking these very important tests that made a big difference in their life, and their frustration with being required to take these other tests, which they would never see the results of. And so it's just interesting. I think it's real important for us always to remember that when we pass policies here at the school board level, or the United States government passes policies, or a state government, that it's important to check with people who are directly affected, and not just believing that we know what's best and therefore we should tell people what to do, because our teachers know, our kids know, our parents know, and our students were just fabulous. So I don't know how I'm going to respond to the 100 emails I got. I just want to say publicly at one time, thank you, we heard you. Now, continue to be engaged in the issue, continue to think about it, and to express what your views are to the the policymakers who can make a difference, and that's the legislature and the Colorado Department of Education. And I think that's about all I'll say about the student protests and the bond. Thank you to our voters. So it was great news. Anyone else? Okay, the next item on our agenda is a consent grouping, and I'll read them. 7.1, the personnel items. 7.2, approval of minutes from the October 28th, 2014 special meeting. Approval of minutes from the October 28th regular meeting. Approval of minutes for the November 12th special meeting. Acceptance of donation from Foothill Elementary School. Acceptance of donation from Manhattan Middle School. New course proposals. A grant from the School Health Department, Substance Abuse Prevention Intervention grant from the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. Do I have a motion to approve? Sam, second. Jenny? Would anyone like to pull any items? Would anyone like to comment on any items? Jenny?
So I just have a general question, and I'm sorry I didn't warn you about this, Bruce, but I noticed there were a number of summer school, seem to be vocational summer school
Yes.
courses for 8th grade, post-8th grade.
Go ahead, ninth grade.
Anyway, so I'm just wondering if that is whether we've had those kinds of programs, or whether that means there's some kind of shift in the programming we're doing at that level, or whether we've always done that and I just didn't know it.
Well, I'll make an initial comment, then I'm going to ask Dr. Pilch to add to that as well, and maybe Dr. Cabrera. I think my understanding as we reviewed these, some of this is to create enriched opportunity and also to maybe increase understanding and interest of future courses they might take, so it's kind of an intro level. And so I think that's part of and obviously it's based on interest. And so I do think it has happened in the past. And Ron, I don't know where Dr. Messier, I don't know who the right person is, or Deirdre,
You want to comment?
Looks like teamwork here.
right, we got a whole team here, so go ahead, you guys, thank
So
you.
let me introduce Dr. Sam Messier. She's been leading our curriculum coordinating council, and we certainly had these conversations. I guess I have less knowledge about the past history. I think Dr. Messenger was absolutely accurate in terms of what the intent was this time. But Sam?
Yeah, so to my understanding, I mean, we've offered many summer programs that bridge 8th and 9th grade before, but this is the first one that's really been aimed specifically at giving kids early exposure to the career and technical education pathways that would be available to them later on.
Thanks, Sam.
So that's for students who've graduated from 8th grade who are going into high school.
That's
When-
correct.
When it says 8, 9.
Correct.
It's going into 9th grade or going into 10th grade. The students will be in those classes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Shelley?
Yeah, I have a question about the College Board's change to the AP Physics class. Can you share their rationale?
Yeah, so my understanding is that the College Board made that shift in the algebra-based physics course, which used to be called Physics AB. And that is now, instead of being a one-year course, they've decided that there was really too much content for that to be covered in enough depth in 1 year. And so they split it into 2 full-year courses, which the College Board named AP Physics 1 and AP Physics 2. So we're simply following suit with what the College Board has requested that we do with those courses.
So there's the Physics AB and there's also Physics BC, right? Or-
That's correct, and that's the calculus-based physics.
And that doesn't change?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you. Sandy, will you please call the roll?
Albright,
Yes?
Belleville,
Yes.
Benford, Fuqua.
Yes.
Marquis. Myers.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Yes, we have Tom on the speakerphone here.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Tom. I'm glad you're here. The
Yeah.
next item on our agenda is the revised budget. And I guess we're starting our new year to think forward budget priorities. So, Dr. Messenger.
I'll do a brief intro to this, and I think Mr. Sutter, our Chief Financial Officer, is prepared to address you. So in your electronic packet, materials, which is obviously available to the public, this is the revised budget for 14-15. So as you know, you approved the 14-15 budget several months ago, and so as we gain information about revenue sources and anticipated expenditures, is an annual fall ritual where we bring back to you for your action is the revised budget. So it's listed as an information on your agenda this night for your consideration, and then bring it back for consent action in the December meeting. So I think Bill's prepared to give you a drive-by so that you for sure understand what is in your packet, and then any one of us would be glad to answer any questions. So Mr. Sutter, if you would.
So I will walk through basically the packet as it's laid out, starting with the general fund, going into other funds. I will be speaking to just the changes from what was adopted to what the revised budget is. So not going through all the past details, but just what's being changed. So in the general fund for resources, $8.2 million additional resources, $6.3 million for the beginning fund balance. This aligns to the fourth quarter financial statements. It's essentially carryover funds and some additional revenues from 2013 and 14 that were unused and fell into ending fund balance. We have some additional ongoing revenue, $1.9 million, some additional students being counted, categorical funding, some READ Act dollars, eCares funds, which are related to preschool. On the expenditure side, $5.7 million. Standard carryover items, textbooks, SRA, Medicaid, professional development is about half of that. One-time carryover, some purchase orders that get received late or aren't yet completed, $800,000. Continuation of multi-year projects to upgrade, improve our ERP system. Some one-time funding requests, $1.5 million. Staffing reserve, additional staffing reserve is built into that. Some of the work around the facilities master plan, educator effectiveness, those notebooks that we put together and showed you. Some ongoing expenditures, $900,000. Strategic plan work, the READ Act, those additional dollars that came in revenue. So we show the expenditure side on that. The director of staff development has been built in, and some adjustments to staffing and contracts. So that's the expenditure side.
Excuse me for just a second. Could you tell us where you are, what page you're on? Are you on a page? Or are you?
Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. Sort of looks like this. Very plain. 6.
Okay. All right. Board members, do you see where that is? Yeah, okay, great. All right, thank you.
So the reserves, Tabor and contingency reserves, 6% each, 3% each on those expenditures, $400,000. Transfers, we have one-time and ongoing transfers. Mostly that is a shift between one-time transfers for transportation and turning that into an ongoing transfer. Then there's also some transfers for the Colorado preschool program and for eCares slots. So as we get additional slots in, those dollars come into the general fund and then they get transferred over to the preschool fund. So that's the general operating fund. For other funds, generally just updated to reflect the ending balance from the 13-14 fiscal year. A few things to note. So the preschool fund that's funded through the general fund, the Colorado preschool program, and the transportation fund are updated to reflect those changes I just mentioned, where those dollars flow into the general fund. Risk management, we did add $500,000 in revenues and expenditures for the closeout of the flood work. That's still getting finished up. And then several changes related to the just passed bond, as was mentioned. The bond redemption fund is not included in here, so that's the debt payment where we record those debt payments, revenues and debt payments. There's too many changes right now, so that information we don't have. The certification of the mill levies, that information comes in right before the December board meeting. So that will all be built into there, as well as the phases and the cash flows related to the work that was mentioned earlier. That'll all be included on the December 9th packet. The 2006 building fund, so it's wrapping up and should be spent out by the end of this calendar year, but that's being closed out. And then we've added the 2014 building fund as a new fund. We have $250 million in revenue. Again, that's still being determined as far as exactly how much will be needed in that first phase. And then $15 million in expenditures. It's probably on the high side, but that allows some flexibility going into that first 6 months of how things get put together and spent. The end.
So I think we'd be glad to answer any questions, Lori, that members of the board would have,
Okay,
Bill or myself.
board members. That was a quick run-through.
Yes.
Come up with a question.
So, yeah, just to mention, both Shelley and Sam were at the audit committee meeting last week, one day, where we went through this. So you have two folks that have had a more extensive, in-depth conversation about this as well.
Is there anything either of you would add to the comments?
No, I mean, all I would say is I'm happy that it looks like the district's out-of-pocket on all the flood costs is going to be pretty minimal. So great work on that, everybody.
Sure, Shelley?
Bill, I just have a question about the athletics fund. If you just look at it from like 2010, 11 to now, it looks like, you know, game admissions are down, activities, tickets are down, participation fees are flat or down from last year. And also the transfers from the general fund is down over those years too. And I'm just wondering, I know this isn't your area, so you may have to redirect the question, but what's going on with athletics? Like, is there just a less of an interest in participating in, most of this is for varsity sports, or high school sports, I think. But I'm just wondering, you know, we're about to invest a lot of money into middle school athletic fields, and I'm assuming that participation will go up as a result of that. There'll be more access to fields, but are we planning on infusing the athletic fund with any more money to support the bond expenditures, or are we looking at why participation's going down, or?
So to answer your last question, Shelley, I think if we want to expand opportunities in the activities program, then that would be a new budget proposal, because mostly that would be cost associated with salaries for coaches or sponsors. So, I mean, we could consider that. I would refer to Michelle DeBerry, who's our activities director, to see if I'm sure they would welcome an expansion of opportunity. It would just need to be considered with new budget proposals. I think many of the investments that will occur through the bond investment are either replacement or improvements on existing facilities that accommodate our existing programs. That's not to say there wouldn't be capacity to do more, but as you know, the bond is about structures, and any cost for opportunity would be mostly related to salary. So we could certainly follow up with Michelle just to see if there are any things pending. And to give a more accurate response to your other questions, I would actually want to go back to Michelle DeBerry and see if she can give us some insight to that, because I don't, off the top of my head, have an answer to those questions. But
Yeah.
if there are things you would like us to follow up as a board, we'd be glad to do that.
I guess I would want to really know if participation right now is a function of not enough coaches. I mean, I'm not sure those things go hand in hand. Like you're saying that more salary
Want to respond
expense
to
would
that,
be incurred.
Dr.
but-
Pilch?
Yeah, I don't think that not being able to hire a coach has ever been a reason for us to not have kids participate.
I don't think so. either.
No.
Yeah.
I've never heard of that. I don't think participation went down. I think this has to do with the budget transfer, I believe. But we could certainly pull those details for
Okay.
you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't ask these questions at the budget review meeting. I just happened to notice it right now.
There's one thing that's worth clarifying as far as what is reflected in the athletics fund is only the high school interscholastic CHASA type athletics. So it's not intramural, and then it's intramural at the middle level. So it's kind of a
Partial.
narrow stripe of what athletics would be.
Right, and the reason the transfer changed this year is because we front-loaded some expenses for the athletics fund that needed to be purchased by June 30 out of the general fund. And so the transfer would have remained the same, but we had to purchase some, I think it was some scoreboards that we had to front-load for last year. That's the only reason the transfer went down. It's essentially the same because they were able to use the
That's what I
scoreboards for the
thought,
current
okay.
year. And then we were talking about participation in the audit committee. And if you see on the page before, you can see there's a pretty good breakout of the current year participation.
Yeah.
Could somebody give us a page number, please?
Oh, sure, sorry.
This is
20.
12.
Or
Right, on page 12, it shows the current participation.
Oh, see.
that I know, Shelley, was a question that you asked.
Yeah.
So that gives you a feel for those participants. But if you wanted some comparative information, Michelle would be the best place to go for that.
Yeah, it just doesn't show over time.
Exactly.
What's happening, so, yeah. I just know, for example, like at Boulder High, you know, there used to be 40 or 50 girls out for basketball, and right now there's 14. And I don't know if that's a trend across high schools and across sports, or, you know, what's the root cause of that. But I just think that there's so much evidence that athletics is good for kids in terms of academic achievement, social emotional growth, feeling engaged in school. And I just would hate to see something happening there and we're not paying attention, so.
Looks like there are 536 girls participating in basketball.
Yeah, I know that, so. So I don't know, is the board interested in finding out more about that? Like, would that be a good agenda item to find out if there's something that we need to be looking at, or whether the explanation is clear and we just need someone who's closer to it to talk to us about it, or? So you
Yeah.
want that on the agenda then, to have someone talk to us about that?
So maybe a good use of time we could go a 3-year perspective on this, so you'd have some trend line data, which isn't reflected here.
Yeah,
Then
that'd be
maybe that
helpful.
would see if there's an interest to have further discussion about it.
Okay.
And we certainly can have, we have these reports, so we can pull that together, so we can follow up with that and get it out to the board for your information.
Good. Yeah, let's get, board members? So I had a question on page 35 on the budget. It was the building fund for 2015 indicates a $15 million expenditures for Phase 1 projects. And you went over that kind of quickly.
So it's definitely on the high side of what is really expected to be spent out, but the phasing that was mentioned earlier has not been fully put together. So it's just an estimate of a dollar amount to appropriate, so we have enough appropriated in the event that it can be changed.
Do we have a tentative idea of when the bonds might be sold? Is this
February.
February? Okay,
The first round.
pardon?
The first round.
The first round, right, for, what they say, the first 250 million, I guess, the plan, yeah, okay. Well, that's a nice problem to have, or a nice thing to be looking forward to, I guess I should say. It's not a problem. So I had a question on page 48. I'm going to read my note. Almost $12 million is available to schools at the school level. And I was just wondering where that money came from. And I was thinking that it was probably PTOs and private donations. And I wonder if that's the correct assumption on my part. I'm on page 48, I think.
The Pupil Activity Fund. Yeah.
Right, those are the student activity checking accounts at the schools.
They're the what?
The student activity checking accounts at the schools. Most of that is all at the high school. There are some at a few middle schools and maybe 1 or 2 at elementary schools, but that's the activity that flows through the high schools. Some of it's fundraised, some of it's fees. Most of the fees, like athletic fees, flow through into the athletic fund, but class fees are processed at the school. And so that's where all this is deposited in these accounts at the schools.
So class fees is into this account, the
That's correct.
pupil activity. So if you had to buy a textbook, workbook for $15, that would come through here.
Correct.
As well as donations from parents to PTO.
Right, there's other accounts too. It might be that the band has an account and then they spend the money out of here. So if the Booster Club gave money to the school, it might be deposited in this account for the band to use or for other. This is kind of where the flow through is for a lot of those high school activities.
So this looks like it's pretty stable over time, this fund.
Correct.
So, okay, thank you.
The page before, which is the trust and agency funds, so the agency funds are the ones that flow through the district. They're not the checking accounts at the schools, and so those tend to be elementary schools typically.
Okay. I had a question about, on page 52, for one of our charter schools, Summit Charter School. And I was just trying to clarify, let's see, last year, it appears that there was no fundraising revenue, and this year, 25,000 of revenue. Is that just because it's being, money going into, Leslie, as you were saying, or Bill or Bruce or somebody, that, like if you had a band account, that might be separate, that might be a 501c3. Is that why it's such a wide difference?
Yes.
How you can go from 0 to 25,000?
Yeah, they have their
Quickly?
own separate accounts that
Okay.
are entirely separate.
It's just a partial picture. This is just a partial picture of all the different opportunities, so it's a little
Okay.
hard to do comparative analysis on that, and also timing of events, so we might do something one year and something different another year.
Okay. All right, and my last question on this budget is on page 55 for Justice High School. And I'm looking at, in the revenue, that there's at-risk supplemental aid in previous years. In 2012-13, and then in 13-14, and today there's none. And I was just curious about what goes on with the at-risk supplemental fund. It seems to me that Justice High is a school that's primarily with students who are at risk. So,
So that's a calculation, it was several years ago when it was built into the legislature passed this, that has to do with the average number of at-risk students at a charter school as compared to the district. And so there's a calculation that happens towards the end of the year when they figure this out. So it's, that's why there's nothing in revenue, because you don't, or in budget, because you don't really know what it's gonna be.
so this is a reflection of cuts at the state level?
No, it's additional revenue that the state has built into the calculation of funding for charter schools, but it's not something that you really know what it's going to be until you find out what it is, if that makes sense. So there will likely be an actual amount that'll show up in this current year.
For 13-14?
For 14-15. There's an unaudited actual for 13-14, that $8,746.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing in the adopted budget or the revised budget. I think that adopted budget was supposed to be 14-15. The title on that's incorrect. So there's nothing adopted in the budget because we really have no idea what that calculation is going to look like until further down the road. And then when there's an actual amount that happens, it gets recorded and given to the school.
For 13-14, that was last year.
So the
Oh, you're saying that's an error?
the title, that 2013-14 adopted budget,
Yeah?
it's supposed to be 2014-15 adopted budget. It's the June adopted budget for this current year.
Okay.
Which is the same for all the other funds. It's like the charter schools didn't get.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are my questions, so thank you. So what's the next step here with this? You said we're
So
bringing
it'll
it
come back
forward in December
as a consent action, yes.
for action?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a comment, Sam? No? Okay. All right.
Great.
If we have other questions, I presume we could,
Absolutely. Let us know.
Raise
and we'll
them
make sure you get
between
them,
now and
we'll copy
then.
the board back on all the responses, so you have the same information.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate the work. Bill Sutter, our budget director. And the next item on our agenda is the proposed 2015 BBSD legislative platform. I see Briggs Gamblin, our communication director and legislative affairs director, coming to the podium, but Dr. Messenger.
Just a brief set. We had a work session on this a couple of weeks ago, and so your input that evening and since has been as best as Briggs' ability would be, with multiple sources of input, as reflected here in the documents that are attached to this agenda item, again, available to the public. This is, of course, what serves ultimately as your platform for the school district. It will be in draft form when we meet with the legislators on December 1st, and our normal timing and pattern is that by the time the session starts on or around January, when we have a board meeting, it would come for your final approval. So it's listed as a study item, and I know that it's pretty self-explanatory what's here, but Briggs would be glad to answer questions. We don't plan to present this evening. It's available, and or if you have other input, this would be a time to visit about that. So,
Screen if people want it.
pardon?
I do have it for the screen.
Oh, okay, so we can bring it up on the screen for the viewing audience if they would like to see. So
Okay.
we'll do that. But anyway, I think we're ready to keep moving this forward with your input, and I know you've already given us input, so thank you for that.
I won't go plank by plank. Thank you, Dr. Messer. I just, some key messages came out of the October 28th special meeting, the work session, that that we wanted to take what had been a large section of what we call beliefs and guiding principles and eliminate those for the vision, mission, goals of the district. And then it was also later suggested in comments afterwards that those be added at the end. And then there were several tightening, some stylistic changes. We lead with BVSD supports or opposes or recognizes. We use BVSD as the operative subject. And then we first of all, I want to thank especially Board Member Benford for her detailed notes and suggestions. I think it's a much tighter. I think you'll find that it's much tighter, and I'm prepared to answer any questions. I think it's you've had it in your electronic packet. It's available to the public through the electronic packet. And if there are no major changes that come out of your discussion with the legislators on December 1st, then it perhaps could come to the December 9th meeting. If there are changes, then it would come to the first January meeting. So, are there any questions?
Sure. Comments?
Yeah,
Tina?
I just think this looks terrific, and it, I like how this reads so much better than the one last year. And we talked a little bit about when do you use the legislative platform, and with this whole testing thing, it was great to be able to pull our stance on testing and paste that into email to parents, and that was a really good usage of that. So I appreciated it.
I want to thank the board for its engagement on this. It's probably the most engaged the board has been, and I think the document's in the best shape in my 6 years of doing this program.
Board members,
Legislation.
comments? Sam, Jenny? Well, then, thank you, Shelley, for some good
Thank you,
feedback.
Briggs.
And,
All right.
Briggs, Jenny?
Yes.
So one of the things that will make this effective, and I really appreciate, is that we're kind of united as an education community, and I believe that, Bruce, your leadership, and you and the superintendent's leadership has helped a good deal on that we're all speaking with one voice. A friend of mine used to tell me that in education, we all circle the wagons and fire inward, and I think we're now firing outwards, perhaps. And so I think that if we were to talk to other school boards throughout the state, many of them, if not most of them, would have similar principles guiding them. And I think that's going to be really effective it's going to help us be more effective as we work with the legislature and the Board of Education into the future.
Bruce, excuse me. Bruce.
I just would comment, I guess, is to build on Jenny's comment. So I serve as the co-chair for the Colorado Association of School Executives Legislative Group, and in my second year doing that, and enjoyed that work, and appreciate your support so that I can. It allows me to have regular communication with lobbyists and others who are very much involved with this, as you are. And frequently, when I share information that I communicate to the board with my colleagues at the Capitol, it's well received and appreciated. So, I mean, you as a board and BBSD as a district is recognized as both being involved and providing leadership on a number of issues. So that doesn't just happen. It's Briggs' hard work and a lot of others. We have a team of us who are very involved in legislative issues in our respective professional association, as you are with CASB. So I want to say thank you for supporting our work with that. We believe it does make a difference, and we have an incredible legislative delegation from Boulder County, which we very much appreciate. And we also think with their assistance and leadership, we make a difference in this legislative process, and it's a time that's important, from school funding to assessment and other important topics. And so we'll continue to monitor activities, and this platform gives us a nice foundation to work from. As we did in past years, we will plan to do again this year, that we'd have like a standing item where we could at least reflect on legislative issues, because not always do we know what's going to come, and not always do we know how it relates to the platform, or we might not have specifically addressed in our platform. So even though this is a great foundation, I mean, we will continue to keep that to be a dynamic process. So again, thanks for your support and leadership. Thank you. Thanks, Briggs.
Thank you, Briggs. Thank you very much. Okay. The next item on our agenda is agenda setting. So I think I heard three things, but I've only got two of them written down right now. So one was at some point to have an update on athletics. What's happening with, participation?
Activity fees, all of it, just to look at it.
Oh, funding questions as well as participation?
Well, I think Leslie answered the funding question.
Okay, so mostly participation. I just want to make sure we've got a focus. So, okay, and then early childhood.
So I might remind you that it was just last spring, Kim Blumen presented to you in a work session on early childhood. So, I mean, if there's specific questions that might be most, well, I mean, we could take more time and do it again. It's been less than a year since we had a report. So, I mean, if there was a specific question, we certainly could do an RFI, a request for information on that, or, I mean, Sandy's here, we'll follow up with Kim with regard to the question or concern that was expressed tonight. Specific to the readiness assessment, I mean, that's still very much in process, and so I guess I'd probably prefer until we're a little closer to knowing what we're actually going to be required to do, what we'll do, and then we can give a report to the board. And again, that could be in a presentation format or at least a written report. I mean, it's sort of evolving along with our other assessment discussions at this point, but certainly we are tracking those issues.
So maybe just put it on the list of things that we want to
On
update
considerations.
as, not in the near future, but in the long-term future.
I mean, we would plan to do regular updates on early childhood anyway, so.
Okay. Well, and I think what we were talking about was the curriculum. In addition to numbers and dollars, it's like,
Right, so Kim presented on that to you last spring about the curriculum program we're using. I heard Shelley specifically concerned about some of the pushing down of curriculum. So I think what I will do is follow up, Lori, to make sure that we have some assurance that that's not occurring, and I'm confident it's not, but I want to follow up with Kim. So again, that was presented as part of what we did last spring, but we can, double check on that aspect of it.
okay, thank you. Jenny?
So, and this is more of a question about, during our DAC report, we heard that Jonathan Dings has presented to DAC on what assessments are telling us so far, and I'm kind of interested in that as well. So is there a format, I mean, do you have any suggestions about that?
So we've asked, I will need to follow up and see what Jonathan presented exactly to DAC. We've asked Jonathan to do, Jonathan Dings, Dr. Dings is our Executive Director for Assessment and Evaluation. We've done some deeper look at our literacy data and our data around English language learners. And so we have a draft report around that. We're also working, I mentioned earlier in the evening, about Education Northwest. And those are two areas that they will be working with us. One of the things that Education Northwest has proposed and we've accepted in this contract is a review of what data we actually do collect, what data might be missing that would be helpful to know, and what analysis are we doing with our data, because that could be a gap as well. When they spend a day with us, they believe we have opportunity in all three of those areas, that we could be collecting additional data, and better use of the data and conclusions. So that's very much in process right now. It will be a piece which informs our work around the strategic plan. One of the action teams will be around literacy and English language learning. So some of this is data that feeds into that. So we certainly could schedule an update on that. I would say it's incomplete at this time, but we certainly can give the report. I think that's some of what Jonathan shared that evening with DAC. So the literacy piece has been something that's been an ongoing as it has been with the board, kind of an annual update on literacy. Now, what I will remind you on literacy, this is the first year we are administering the iReady iStation, which is the new literacy. So that's one of our challenges. Again, we're moving away from DRA2 to a new assessment. So some of what we'll be doing over the next year is see what the relationship is between our students' performance on the DRA2, which we've used for a number of years, which was not an acceptable literacy assessment for the state, so that's why we're moving away from it. Now, it could be administered in some locations, but we lose that comprehensive data picture. So that's just one of our challenges that, we're working through. So anyway, I could follow up, Jenny, and see if that, I would like to put it in the context of our work with the strategic plan when we go forward, so. And we certainly could give a
Well,
written
well, I
report.
agree that many of the reports we hear should be in the context of the
Yeah.
strategic plan, but given that, I would like to know as much about, as DAC does about
Yeah,
our
yeah.
data.
Good. We can follow up and see what was presented.
Board members, any other comments? Okay, so one thing on my mind is that we're having our meeting with our legislators on the Monday following Thanksgiving break.
December 1st.
And we typically have one board member lead off with some general information about topics. And the topics I think we've agreed that we're going to talk about are privacy and I could be wrong on this, but this is what I have in my notes, privacy and funding and assessments. And there might have been one more, although I think that's what it was. So if you, board members, are interested in speaking to that issue at our breakfast meeting, please let me know so that we can plan accordingly, just to make sure that we have somebody ready to talk about what those issues are. And I think, Bruce, you've given us some talking points on some of these issues on just privacy.
Yeah, we provided you talking points on privacy and also a timeline for privacy as a follow-up to that work session. And we will be sending to you, following tomorrow's cabinet meeting, an update on this data collection around assessment. So we'll send
Okay.
that to you. Leslie will finalize the most recent copy of that at least.
And probably any of us could speak to the issue of funding, given that we've had a lot of talking about it and concern about it. I don't know if it would make sense just to get a couple points together to really focus on that we could give to the person who decides to speak to funding. So let me know if you're interested in just taking some additional responsibility for that topic at our meeting. But all of us, of course, will chime in.
And I would just say, Lori, to your last point, is that if you choose to want to be the spokesperson on a topic and you feel like you could use some additional background information, if you just communicate with me, Sandy and I will follow up and make sure, again, we probably share it with the full board, but I want you to feel like you've got adequate background information if you don't feel you have it now. So just let us know, okay?
Thank you. That's great.
Do we have an hour and a half or?
7:30 to 9, is it? Yeah, 7:30 to 9 on Monday, December 1st is their scheduled time. In this room, I think,
Yes.
Sandy? Yeah. So it'll be a public meeting and the public's welcome to attend.
Okay, right. Okay. So, yeah, an hour and a half, and we'll go from there. And then interviews later on that day.
Yes, so yes, we are scheduling.
Interviews.
How are we doing scheduling? Well, Sandy's busy.
For our board retreat.
So our board retreat, so Tim Waters and Jim Eck will be together to conduct individual interviews with each member of the board, and we've picked those 2 days. I think it's Monday, Tuesday, December 1, 2. So hopefully that will work for folks to schedule while they're here in the district.
Okay.
And then we're still working to secure the date for the actual retreat in January. Is that right? Okay.
Great. Okay. So, anything else? Well, then, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for being here today.
Well,